G'day and welcome to the Hunting Connection podcast. My name is Zach Williams and I am your host. Here we'll connect you with hunters, fishers and outdoor enthusiasts from around the globe. This podcast will share hunting and fishing stories including past experiences and tackle the tough hunting stereotypes our community faces. We hope to be a positive influence to those outside the community while also having a laugh along the way. Hope you enjoy the podcast. G'day and welcome to another episode of Hunting Connection podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by Joe from Ridgewalker Expeditions. How you going, mate?
G'day, Zach. Thank you for having me, mate.
More than welcome, mate. More than welcome. You know, you've got a pretty cool background and pretty cool story, so I'm more than happy to get you on and have a chat.
Yeah, thanks. It has been a wild ride, I have to say. I feel very privileged to have experienced the life I have. It hasn't always been easy and hasn't come without a lot of sacrifices, but the hunting has been pretty much a constant since I was a little boy.
That's awesome.
Some of my earliest memories were, when I was far too young. I would have been not much more than a toddler. I was pretending to hunt wild boar in the mountains it was actually in southern Italy with a knife that my dad had given me. And I remember telling him I could see the wild boar's legs up ahead because that would have been about my head level. It wasn't true. I was just making it up and trying to live the story, you know. And it just developed and developed and developed. And as I grew up, I had to sort of conform to a lot of the responsibilities of life, which, you know, just the simplest things like school and then uni and then work and a career and family. And throughout all of that, the hunting was in the early years when it wasn't my main focus. It was just a constant pull away from what else I was meant to be doing. So I didn't come from a hunting family, even though in that story there's my dad. He's humoring me as a little boy, but as a young guy, he did a little bit of duck hunting, but that was it. He was not interested in big game hunting at all. And to the contrary, I was not interested in any sort of wing shooting ever. And so when I was 5 years old, we moved to Australia and he stayed in Italy. So I didn't have someone to be a mentor or a role model for the hunting. And that didn't seem to matter to me. I kept doing it, even though, my mother was quite opposed, you know, not just ethically, but also to having weapons, you know. So it started out with making my own hunting toys and tools that started with, of course, the slingshots and the rubber band guns, and you would, hunt birds or, whatever you could, mice around the house, which upgraded to a bow when I was about 9 years old, I'd say. But I wasn't even able to do anything. I don't think I got anything with my bow until I was about 12. It would have been a rabbit the first thing, and then a fox, and then as we progress. And even during school, a lot of the times, the weekends, everyone was partying, going out, socializing. It's not that I didn't do that, but at least half the weekends, I'd say that me and a friend would get on our dirt bikes with a backpack, head off. In the school years, it was just bows, head off into wherever we could and try and find whatever we could to hunt, And of course, in those days, there was virtually no deer. They were kind of legendary creatures at that point. This is the mid-90s in Victoria.
Victoria, beautiful.
Yeah, so I grew up in that sort of landscape from originally in the west and then into Gippsland and then into the Yarra Valley. But I would take as much time away that I could to get abroad or, get into Queensland or take trips to the Northern Territory. And there, I think I started to feel like a more serious hunter. I was quite frustrated in Victoria that really all I had on offer was rabbits and foxes. And there was, at least within my circles of knowledge as well at the time, And, it progressed. And I became fortunate enough to, by then I moved to Europe. I moved to Italy and I tried to fulfill the family prophecy and study law, become a lawyer, and join the firm that I would take over. I gave that a good crack, but the whole time I was just looking forward to I was living for the next trip away, because at that point you're living in a concrete jungle. And I wasn't working 9 to 5. I'd be working, 6 to 10, 6 in the morning to 10 at night. And just so that I could make up the time to get away. So the flip side of that was that it gave me the opportunity to hunt all over the world as a client, doing what I'm now offering and selling and organizing for people. So I feel very lucky to have lived both sides of that experience, being both the agent or outfitter and the client on pretty much all the hunts that I sell, that I work with. So
amazing.
There was I think that's a pretty unique place to come from in this industry. And I'm very thankful by now that at the time I wasn't. I was frustrated to be cooped up in an office, but there's definitely been a silver lining to that. All along, back in 1997, we acquired the hunting grounds where the fallow deer hunting is still today. And it didn't begin as a fallow hunting focus. It was actually more wild pigs and roe deer in the early days. And the fallow deer, first of all, there weren't those heads that we're getting now. They really didn't exist then. But through another good fortune that was being issued with a pretty heavy-handed cull program that had fairly flexible kind of guidelines, I was able to exploit it to try to improve the quality of the herd. And it looks like we did pretty good, because once it took about 10 or 15 years to really see a consistent, great quality deer. But then by then it also took on its own momentum, and those deer started taking care of themselves, and the cull plans dropped off and became lighter and lighter. So that worked out really pretty well. And I think in the early days, it was actually Italians, locals hunting pheasant. That was the bread and butter. But I had no enthusiasm for that. And being an Aussie now, expat, I quickly established, online connections and friendships, and started doing swap hunts and hosting people I'd met. This is the late 90s now. 98 it would have begun. And so that became this kind of sideline to the legal business, which, the family wasn't too happy about this focus on trivial things as they thought they were, but it kept me going. It's what kept me living that life and able to get through to the end. I ended up doing about 15 years of career in it before I got out, and then dedicated myself completely to the hunting. So that's a summary, but in between there's a hell of a lot of adventures, misadventures, and developments, pivotal moments. I think the pivotal moment that most of the Aussie listeners are going to be more aware or interested in would have been when the fallow deer here got onto the radar of the hunters in Australia. To be honest, I'm not sure how that even happened, because I hadn't had any friends from Australia come out to hunt fallow deer. It would have been possibly by means of getting through the US and coming back around by word of mouth. And that was about 8 years ago, I'm going to guess. But since then, that hunt has been what has, I have to say, kind of supported the rest of Ridgewalker, because the Ridgewalker, even the name came from not the first, because I had still had the family concession. But then I got a concession in the mountains, which would have been, this would have been a little over 10 years ago, 12, maybe 14 years ago now. And mountain hunting still is possibly my greatest passion. And I always found that if you put in the extra effort, the locals would want to hike up the mountain as little as possible to find the chamois or the deer that they're after, and then come down, get down to a warm, comfortable bed. But I enjoyed getting to the ridge tops and hiking the ridges and glassing from the ridges. And I'm aware that it's not necessary to spend that much energy to get there, but if you do put that extra mile in, it'll pay you back. Because when you're hunting from on the ridge top, you've got everything else working for you. And so those years I was focused very much on the alpine hunting. And then I got out of that concession and started to also focus more on hunts abroad. And I mean, the summary over all those years goes from, I'm going to say off the top of my head, maybe 10 African countries, and ranging from either the northwest all the way through to the east and south, and Burkina Faso and Benin, Central African, Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, Zambia, Botswana, I don't know, what am I leaving out? Tanzania. And then, of course, the sideline to a lot of it was the spearfishing, which is a sweet side gig where you're in beautiful tropical locations a lot of the time, enjoying the sun, fresh fish, relaxed vibes, and hunting big pelagics. So yeah, I mean, look, it's an enviable lifestyle. It sounds very glamorous. I can assure you, it's also not any easier than any other lifestyle.
I could imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot, and it takes a lot to keep up. And then when you get a day or two of downtime, you feel it'll come down and you'll just have to recuperate, you know.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I've done a couple of overseas hunts. I know how much it takes it out of you, let alone being like you, jumping from country to country, guiding hunts and supporting hunts and everything that you do. For the listeners, you're currently in Tuscany at the moment, thereabouts? Or?
I am.
Yep.
Yep.
So you've been over there. Right now we're recording on a Sunday night. You've just had Adam Greentree over there, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. He's had amazing hunt from the videos and all the stories he's put up. It's been incredible seeing what you guys have been chucking up there. But what I do want to do is jump back a bit to when you first moved back over to Italy and you've taken over these concessions for your family with the hunting stuff. I know you did cover it a little bit on Maddie's podcast, but it was really, really interesting, and I'd like to dive deeper into it. So you mentioned that you had a really heavy culling program. And you said on Maddie's podcast that you kind of not stayed away, but you kind of changed up how you were doing the culling compared to what they wanted you to do, and you changed it for better trophy management. What was the original culling like there? What did you guys have to do, and then what did you do to better the hunting grounds there?
Okay, well. So, in order to participate in the culling, and I can't hide that I didn't participate, I just took it. There was no one else to really participate in it other than me. But in order to be what they would say habilitated, you've got to do a course. And during the course I participated in, it was one of the very earliest, what they call selective hunting courses, which means not what you think it means, not what selective means. But for them, it meant big game. And at that time, it was only conceived that it was from a high stand, and the hunters, not the cull, but they were in the same vein, were issued with tags for animals by age and sex classification, which is pretty standard across the world still. But they were very adamant that there should be no selective criteria based on trophy, making the point that we are not predators in the natural sense and haven't got what it takes to establish what's right and wrong. And so the dictate was that if you're issued, let's say, an adult male tag for any of the three deer species that they have here, you should take the first adult male of that species that you're presented with an opportunity for. And I think the logic then was that there was a lot of pressure from the local administrations to get the numbers down because they were being inundated with damages claims, be it from automobile collisions and agricultural damage, because the wild fauna in this country belongs to the state until it has been harvested by a hunter, at which point it belongs to that hunter. So if you hit a deer with your car in Italy, the state, as the owner of the deer, is liable.
Yeah, wow.
Right. I can tell you that the other side of that, even as having practiced as a lawyer, isn't. They're not very keen to step up to that responsibility and pay you out for the damage. I can imagine. So at the same time, they're aware of it. People still have and still do try to get their money out of the government if they suffer damages due to wildlife.
Yeah. And
so the original cull plan was broken down, and a pretty basic format you'll see in many places, where you would have a decreasing percentage of specimens to be taken leading up, like a pyramid form, to the adult male. And at the top would be the adult, the adult male of the species, and being the one that everybody's after as the trophy animal. And well, what we did was the numbers would be issued, and you would have to hand in the heads at the end of the season. They'd be counted and they'd be assessed to see if you got it right. And we didn't always get it right. That's all there is to it. And at the time, you would be subject to what they called a disciplinary letter. You would basically be growled at for having got it wrong. And that was very convenient, because I put a lot of the focus on looking for what I deemed as defects in the young bucks, being the clefts, or just being particularly small, first head being really small, a spike with, a lot of people say you can't tell anything about a spike. I don't buy into that. If you see a really poor spike, small in body, small spikes, chances are it's not going to develop into a superstar. But if you see a good, well-built spike, and some of the spikes here, we picked up a skull yesterday that had been long gone and dead, that had one little a snag, like the beginning of a brow tine on one side, and little forks on the top of both sides. And I know from experience that means that's going to show up, very, very strongly next year. And within, like maybe one generation, you are already seeing an improvement in the spikers coming out with little forks and little snags and starting to show up. They have good feed. We've got a total of about 500-600 acres of sorghum that used to, but not so much these days, get occasionally sort of a strip of something else with a bit of protein in it sewn in. And with the does, the focus was just looking for smaller does, or does with small calves or fawns. At the time, I was talking quite a bit to some deer farmers from the UK who, I think those guys were the forefathers of the insane red deer we're seeing in New Zealand today. That was going on in the 90s. That was already going on in the velvet farming in the UK. Maybe not to the degree we're seeing now. But so by focusing on larger does, big healthy looking does, and culling out any doe, you had to be pretty heavy handed. Any doe that had a look about her that wasn't, amongst the others, didn't look quite as good. Maybe she was shedding late or early and looked scruffy, maybe just a bit skinny. Or had a fawn that was visibly smaller. Well, you would knock off the fawn and then the doe. And with the bucks, it was a question of clefts and palms, looking for any bucks that had longer but thinner palms. And I'm talking about a 2 or 3 year old buck. They were heavily targeted, heavily shot at, in the order of, many deer like that each year. We'd have a cull program of 80 to 120 deer. Most of it, a large percentage of it, was done at night. In the daylight, you could only get, but the best was done in the daylight. You would be able to sit in a hide stand, you'd shoot a particular young buck that you didn't want in the breeding pool, and the rest was done at night. That was in accordance with the guidelines and the laws of doing that that type of culling. Wasn't considered a hunting operation, and I never did consider it any form of hunting. And that went on until probably the mid 2000s, late 2000s, I'm going to say, quite enthusiastically. But by then already the quality was showing up remarkably bigger and better. And we're also fortunate that our area, which is it's not huge. I mean, for Italy, it's quite big, but it's about 3,500 acres. But we neighbour onto an area of about 15,000 acres that is mostly pretty dense oak forest with some big fields, and it's kind of like a state park where there's no hunting allowed, and so that area serves also as a big reserve tank for all these deer. And I think that because we're growing sorghum and sometimes wheat or whatever for the animals, we gave up on agriculture for a profit and just let it go to the animals. And now with the sorghum, you can just leave it for 3-4 years anyway. I think that we held a large population of does because I've never been able to really crack the code on where the bucks go in this, in between ruts. You see them bachelor up, like they'll disappear now. Within a week, they'll disappear. They'll show up again around March, just before they cast. You'll see them for about 2 weeks here and there. Then you won't see them again. And in velvet, they'll show up at night a bit on the big fields. But the does, of course, are always around, always grazing on the big paddocks and the big fields. And I think there's a lack of does because there is a lack of that kind of habitat for them in the state parks, because they're not managed or looked after, and that's our fortune there. That's what keeps bringing all the big bucks to us each year. It's a fascinating dynamic. I've never figured it out. Even when was it? It was in 2008, I think it was. 2008. We started doing a lot of aerial surveying, and acquired a little R22, and I thought that would be the key to unlocking all the mysteries of the deer. And it helped a little bit, but it wasn't a game changer like I thought it would be. Those deer are still quite mysterious when it comes to the off season, at least the big bucks. The young guys are quite predictable. They hang out with the does. Not,
No, that's incredible, man. That's awesome. Just crazy how, a bit of heavy-handed management, how you can turn around your herd sizes, the way, like in antler growth and buck maturity and all of that. It's a completely different system to here in Australia, as you would know. But I've had guys from Scotland on, and I've had guys from Denmark on, and they've talked about all the management practices they have over there. And the boys in Denmark, you have to do. They're talking about the freaking TAFE course that you have to do before you can go hunting. Yeah, the 100-page test or whatever it is. It's absolutely insane, and I pay that to the European countries, the dedication that you have to put in to be a hunter over there compared to what it's like here in Australia. I don't want to set up any barriers to entry for people getting into hunting, so it's one of those things. You want as many people as possible to get into the lifestyle, but it's also good seeing these other countries have such a heavy-handed program that focuses on good herd management.
Absolutely. Look, Europe's been in that game for, well, as long as they've had history and tradition. They've been working at it for hundreds of years. And yeah, it's a tricky thing to get right. I can't claim to have gotten it right. Even in my case, there's a part of the results that looks like we got something right, but I've seen each country has their own sort of philosophy and their own direction. Most of them, you're correct, they do have quite a rigorous approach to becoming a hunter, and they require a fair bit of education. I wouldn't say Australia is that far behind, because people, they're kind of expected to know it as well, which makes up for it. And I mean, you got the duck identification course, which is pretty tricky. It doesn't, when I did it, at least, they didn't teach you anything about the biology or the habits of any of the ducks, just IDing them on the wing.
Yeah,
that's still like that.
I personally haven't done a WIT course yet. It's all online now for Victoria and South Australia, so you don't even have to go in and do it. It's all online, so that's pretty good there. From what I understand, yeah, it's mainly just how to identify them on the wing. But that's what I do respect about some of these European countries, is that you're going deep into the biology and how everything works. Like the boys I had on from Denmark, I actually met them while I was over in New Zealand, at Lake Tekapo. We ran into each other and started chatting, and since then been chatting on here and got them on the podcast. But just hearing what they have to learn to get into hunting, and how stringent the tag system is, and what they can take, what time of year they can take it, and they have to know everything from when that deer drops to when it's dying of old age.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, even the course, when I said that I did one of the earliest courses for that form of hunting in Italy, who was admittedly 30 or 40 or 50 years behind the rest of Europe in big game hunting, at least when it comes to deer in the hills and the flatlands. In the Alps, they've always had the Germanic type tradition with the chamois and the alpine stuff. But they were talking about, we had to learn the digestive systems of ruminants and how that worked, even though it didn't necessarily, it doesn't change much in your hunting, but I do think it can enrich your experience the more you know. I reckon those courses, I'm all for it, but it'd be good if they mixed in some real world, like even take people to a deer park, or have a place set up with some deer in a pen, but just to get to see them, because at least in the courses I did, and this was 25 years ago now, they had drawings to try to illustrate the difference between the age class and things like this. But I'm sure that they'll catch up. And as you're talking about Denmark, I've spent quite a lot of time in Denmark living there, and they're possibly some of the most rigorous and stringent in the industry. But I think they must have some brilliant practices for management as well, because, for example, just out of Copenhagen, where I lived for a few years, there's a big park. It's not. I don't think it's supposed to be for the purposes of breeding a deer or having a deer park. It's a big park that's open to the public. There's bike paths, people going and picnic, and it has some of the most phenomenal red deer you'll see anywhere. Why, natural red deer, and even though it butts up against the CBD almost, they shoot I have a Danish guide, Rasmus. He was just telling me the other day that I think they shoot about 40% of the population each year. And the deer, the health and quality of those deer in there is phenomenal. They're incredible. And they have a lot of great fallow deer, more in the northern European style than ours here in Tuscany, which are, they don't have I think it's a question of bone density. These deer are, the hunter isn't really going to notice, but in most of the rest of Europe, you're paying a trophy fee based on the weight of the skull, and then they score in their scoring system, including the weight of the skull and where the skull and antlers together makes up a fairly important factor of it. And the deer in this region are light in weight, but they make up that they can be, we'll use scoring not because it's important, but as the reference, they can have the same score as those really heavy heads from the northern part of Europe, because they just make up for it with volume.
Yeah.
With length and spread and width and palm, and there's just more there. It's just not as heavy.
Just how thick the palms were on Adam Greentree's bucks that he posted up, just absolutely insane.
Yeah.
No,
yeah. It's an awesome hunt.
Oh, it looks at each year we're seeing Australian Instagram and Facebook's flooded by Aussies over there chasing these fallow in all these European countries, and it's just absolutely insane seeing 2 dozen 3 dozen bucks on just a rut pad croaking their heads off. It's absolutely insane. But jumping back to what you were saying about having to learn the biology and stuff like that, one thing I will give credit to the Australian hunters for doing of late is there's been a bunch of hunting beginning courses popping up, ran by different hunters. There's 2 or 3 down in Victoria that I know of, a couple in New South Wales, a couple in Queensland, and new hunters are actually going out and seeking these experiences to learn more about the animals. And a lot of these places, they're getting carcasses in and breaking down the carcass in front of everyone to show the anatomy, show butchering skills and all of that. And then a couple of the ones in Victoria and Queensland, possibly the ones in New South Wales as well, they actually spend a morning and an afternoon going around looking at deer and pointing out the different areas they'll be, what to look for, what scat to look for, and giving these new hunters the experience firsthand. And they're actually going and paying for this experience rather than these the European countries where you have to go do it to hunt. These people are actually seeking it out and going to do it.
That sounds awesome. That sounds like exactly what we need. More culture about the animals, more enthusiasm, more involvement, because a lot of people don't get that far into it. And I think it's also because maybe they're just on their own or with a friend who is equally unprepared,
Yeah.
No, that's a really good thing, I think. And the more awareness, the more in-depth knowledge people gain, the stronger it makes the group of hunters. It gives us a culture that will tie us together, and it gives us, a common kind of understanding, and then we can get deeper into it and become more. I think you'll enjoy it more, but you'll respect it more. You'll understand it better. You'll be able to talk about it in a better way to people who are not familiar with it and potentially hostile or have a negative approach or judgment of it.
Yeah. No, 100%. I was lucky. I started hunting with my grandfather but that was goats and rabbits, foxes, hares, that type of stuff. Didn't really come across deer till I was 17, 18, and then when I got onto them, that's when my passion for them started. But I made, every mistake known to man when starting hunting them, and I started hunting them with a bow as well, so that made it twice as hard. It makes it a little bit easier behind the rifle these days, because I'm here in South Australia. As you can see behind me, I've got my bows behind me, but in South Australia, bow hunting's been banned at the end of last year, so we can't bow hunt here anymore. So I have to travel across to Victoria, your old stomping grounds, and go chase them, and New South Wales, and where I'm fortunate to have friends, and you've got public land over there to hunt. But another thing I want to jump back to on the episode you did with Maddie was you're talking about the ownership of land, how that private property isn't really private property over in Italy. It's I'll let you go into it. You're the expert.
Oh, look, yeah, I can see how it's a fascinating concept for Aussies. I'll start with this. There is no word in the Italian language that translates to trespassing, and as a concept, they don't really have it in a lot or most of Europe. And part of that's quite understandable, because imagine there's been people roaming this continent for 100,000 years. I don't know the paleontology side of it, but the fallow deer were introduced into Western Europe about 4,000 years ago by nomadic herders that moved across from the Middle East, what would today be Iran. And we talk about Persian fallow deer, which Persia is the previous empire that was in Iran. There were a people who had semi-domesticated the fallow deer and wandered across with these animals. That's an explanation to why fallow deer we see white ones, males, reds, and black ones, melanistic, because when humans started to select them for a domestication process, they would favor the white ones because it made them easier to keep track of, to spot. And that developed over the last thousands and hundreds of years into a lot of humans on comparatively not a lot of land, and everybody wanting and needing to be able to use the land somehow. So in the Scandinavian countries, they have what they call allemansrecht, which means all man's right. And it basically means every man has the right to roam the wild places. Which is a cool thing.
I like
they don't
that.
have the right to hunt them. You can't hunt, you can't camp, you can't fish the creeks. I could be wrong about Norway and Denmark, but I know that in Sweden, because that's my current home in Europe, you're allowed to pick mushrooms, berries. You're not allowed to drive on the land or the roads necessarily. You're just allowed to walk around. You can sit down and have a picnic. You can pick up blueberries or raspberries, have a day out, but you can't hunt. Where Italy's different is, and that concept applies to state, to national parks and private property. We're talking about Scandinavia. In Italy, it's kind of the opposite. So there are actually kinds of all public land is off limits to hunting. There are no state parks like we have in Victoria, for example, or New South, where you can go and hunt. But they made this provision where hunters have the undeniable right to hunt on private property. Not only do they have the right, because it doesn't really work that way here. You don't just decide you'll go hunt this animal in that area. You've got to go through the administrations, the government first, and apply or enroll, do the necessary courses, pay all the necessary taxes. Hunting is extremely expensive in Italy. Between your firearms and your hunting taxes, you'll pay on average probably about 600 Australian a year just to keep current with. That's your starting point. And if you have extras, you can spend easily double that if you're doing two things, for example. So you apply or enroll for a type of hunting, and then you'll be assigned a place, a region, all the way down to a GPS point where you may be allowed to put your high stand if it's a case of hunting deer or certain types of birds. But the Italian public hunting, I'm going to say, is about 80% centered around wing shooting or rough shooting pheasant or hares, sort of where most of the Italians that's about as. Then there's driven hunt for wild boar, and they don't really consider that big game because it's sort of a more traditional game.
I'd say the Italian population here in Australia would be 80% wing shooting still too.
Oh, is it? Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah. They love their wing shooting. So if you wanted to hunt boar, you join a boar hunting team, having already enrolled and paid the appropriate taxes, and then that team has been assigned an area that they can hunt in, and that area will fall over private property. And I don't think it's a good system. I see that it's not a good system because it doesn't compel the hunters to look after the land they're given. And they're given a virtually infinite supply of land, so they will go in and create havoc, damage roads, upset the landowners, and it doesn't matter because they won't come back there till next year because they have enough land that they can move on.
That's disappointing.
It is. And that then contributes to a negative image, which is well-deserved, you know. And conversely, you don't get the privilege of being, for all the taxation that you're paying to your state, you don't get the privilege of using any of the state's land, which would make a lot more sense to hunt on.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult situation.
I could imagine. You were saying to keep hunters out, you have to either build a moat or a fence around the property. But then you were saying something along the lines of, if you do that, you're then not allowed to hunt that land either. Was that? That's
right. Yep. That's correct. Yeah. The exception is if you apply and are granted what the status of a reserve. And that's basically where you transform your land into land where, in today's metrics, it's a business. So you have to, you'll be given quotas that you have to reach for whatever species. It's usually not just one animal. And then, of course, with it comes all the bureaucracy and the rules and paperwork and all the rest of it. In that case, the public cannot hunt reserve land, regardless of it being private. But if you just have your own land and you don't want hunters on there, your options are, like I said, you can fence it. It has to be a 1.8 meter mesh type fence. It can't be strands of wire. And the idea there is that it's supposed to keep any and all game or animals out. How that is going to apply to the birds, I don't know, but that's the logic. Or, and this, yeah, I guess this is why this generated so much interest. You can dig a moat. a moat, I believe, 1.8 meters deep and up to 3 meters wide, if I'm not mistaken.
That's a hell of a
And
moat.
it is, mate. Oh, it's a hell of a job, yeah. So it's a curious sort of a setup they have going on, but it's sort of so it's fine. Nobody here really suffers it too much. They work with it. They work around it. One thing that can surprise hunters when they come to Tuscany is that particularly on the weekends, the bush is not silent, not a quiet place. There are gunshots going off all around. If you're in any area that's sort of close to one of the boundaries, you will hear gunshots all day. The majority is going to be pigeon shooters or pheasant shooters or songbird shooters. Songbirds. They have a very elaborate, complicated method for hunting, for enticing songbirds in, that involves hundreds of cages with live decoy birds and hides and special cartridges. And I mean, it's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of dedication to hunt these songbirds, which they harvest to take home and eat.
That's
so. Yeah, it's a weird and the deer, for example, they don't care. They're used to it. They're not. You can be sneaking up on a deer and trying not to make any noise, and you can hear gunfire, close enough that it should bother it, and they don't even flinch. They don't look up.
That's crazy. You were saying with Maddie, and you said earlier, you've got 3 species of deer in Italy. So that's what you said: roe deer, red deer, and fallow. Is that correct? And then you were saying with Maddie that there's bear, wolves, and a bunch of other.
Yeah, look, that's the other surprising thing about Italy, is that it for it being so densely overpopulated. In between the overpopulation, there's a lot of wilderness, and there's a lot of fauna that people wouldn't imagine is here. Here in Tuscany, there's a lot of wolves. The last week, I don't think we saw any, but the week before, we had 7, and one of the guys who wasn't carrying a firearm was starting to get worried because he had this wolf come up to him, just looking at them and walking at them, came into about 40 meters and the guides were saying he wasn't sure what to do next because the wolf wasn't scared, didn't want to back away. That said, I can't consider them to be dangerous in any real sense.
What's the management like over there? Are they protected or are they huntable?
Oh, absolutely.
Protected.
They're given a special protection status, and I can see some problems coming up with them. I mean, no, there already are and have been for about 10 years problems going back to the agricultural side of things, and dogs, domestic dogs, getting taken frequently. The wolves, the understanding I have is that they were released either deliberately and from research centers and things that ended up running out of funding and just letting them go. I don't know if that's true, but that's the story that we have locally.
Yeah, wow. What are they? Are they grey wolves or?
No, they're the European.
Yeah.
European wolf. There's actually a species. I don't know if these are the Italic wolf, which is an endemic species of wolf. I've heard that because of these research stations or whatever it is, these releases Some of them may be a different species, but all the wolves you'll see have that European wolf. It's not quite as majestic as your timber wolf,
Yeah.
or they're a little more reddy brown. Tail tends to be a little less bushy, probably a bit smaller. I mean, they're not a small dog. They're about I'm going to say 35, 40 kilos. They're like a German Shepherd type thing. And there's been a definite explosion. Until the late 2000s, I spent a lot of time out in the forest, and I think I had 2 wolf encounters in 15 years or so. And it went from that, which was pretty par for the course. They were a rare and kind of legendary thing, that to having, in those years, 10 or 15 encounters in a year, and now you can have that many in a month.
That's insane. That's crazy. And are they a brown bear over there as well, or what's the...
Yeah, there's a European brown bear. There's also an endemic subspecies that's found only in central Italy of European brown bear. And the other is, I'm going to sort of guess, your standard European brown bear that filters in from the northeast. The bears are not that problematic. I mean, in central Italy, they're a problem for the agriculture, for the orchards, the beekeeping. There's a lot of beekeeping, and at the same time, a lot of bears. So they have electric fences around their hives. And look, I've been told by researchers that there's a hell of a lot more bears than the numbers say. And I tend to think that's true from just observations, but they're not a great problem. Again, they're protected. They're not huntable. There's something that's sort of off the radar that nobody's really that interested in. And of course, there's a little bit of tourism around it, but not much. And then they have, the other species. I guess there's actually lynx in these forests.
That's cool.
Yeah, I've never actually seen a lynx in Italy, but they're here. I've seen the tracks. And then there's a lot of weird and wonderfuls, like they have the African porcupines.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. They were brought over by the Romans a couple of thousand years ago. Yeah.
Is there a lot of introduced species over there? Just like you said that there's the porcupine, but is there any other weird, wonderful introduced species? Because it blows me away, the different like introduced species. Like the first time I seen a hedgehog in New Zealand, that blew me away.
Yeah, they have them, but they're native hedgehogs, and they're a cute, funny, harmless little thing. The only other in Italy they have nutria, which is basically like a beaver with a rat's tail. And then in some parts of the country, there's mink.
Yeah, wow.
And mink came from well-intending but poorly educated people releasing them from farms and sort of terrorist attacks. They would go into the fur farms and freed them. And the nutria are doing a lot of damage to the waterways, the floodways, the canals, and the mink, of course, they're a ferocious predator, so they're devastating the small fauna. Luckily, I'd say the mink are more in areas that haven't got a lot of forest and a lot of wilderness, so I think it's fairly well contained. I could imagine they would wreak havoc if they were here. But other introduced pests, I think that's it. They've got issues like everyone else. The starlings in the cities are an issue.
Yeah.
But that's really it as far as introduced. There's some areas where you get a bit of feral pigs mixed in with the wild pigs. That's another interesting point, that the wild pigs here are not a feral pig. It's
the
original, which is a very different creature to the feral pig. They have red meat, they have undercoat and bristles. So when they lose, they molt. In the summer, they look pretty silly, especially the big boars. They look like chubby and bald with the short hair on them. And that same pig in the winter looks incredible. It looks like a bison, because he'll have 20 centimeter long or longer bristles with a thick woolly undercoat underneath it. And they have that bison build, they're quite narrow, tall like a blade. They're a cool creature. In some areas, you'll see they've been contaminated by domestic pigs. Actually, yesterday, there was a sow out with a bunch of suckers, and one of them was whitish. That'd be the result of some inbreeding with, because a lot of people keep pigs what they call semi-wild. They kind of just let them roam a bit and feed them a bit, but and that of course has diluted them. But again, it's not something that gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, it's crazy. Pigs are just such a cool critter because they're all that one genus, that Scruffa, and they can all interbreed, and they vary so much. Like you look at the wild pigs here in Australia, and then the ones in New Zealand, you get that real blue color to them, and then you got the Eurasian wild boar, and just they can all breed together, and they're all the one species. Is just that blew my mind when I learned that.
Oh mate, yeah. Look, I took a deep dive into them, and there are some wild species of pigs throughout Asia.
Yeah.
There's ones with great big tufts of bristles coming out of their snouts.
Yeah, it grows through like the top of their snout and stuff. It's
the baby rusa. Yeah, the baby rusa from Indonesia.
Yeah, they're cool. Yeah. I like the old world pigs too, like the peccaries. I was very fortunate that I hunted Mexico a few years back and got to take a few peccary there, some skunk pigs, and they're just such a cool little critter. They're so cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. The pigs, unfortunately, actually, though, even if they get interbred with the domestics, it doesn't take long to revert back. It doesn't take more than one or two breedings back to revert back to the original form. And pigs are a huge part of Tuscan culture. It's their thing is the driven boar and wild boar pasta and wild boar stew is a big important thing. And after the driven hunts, they all go to they have like a public abattoir or butchery where they take all the pigs and everyone stands around to get their part. So each member of the hunting team will get usually just shopping bag with a chunk of meat in it. So it's a big thing. It's a big part of Tuscan culture.
Are they doing those driven pig hunts with firearms, or are they old school spears? Because I know some of those European countries still go old school with the driven boars and the spears. Yeah,
no, they're shooting them. I think the spears is more a deliberate. Like they'll send a bunch of hounds after a pig to bail it up and spear it. They still do that in France, I think. But the traditional hunt here is a lot of the guys are just using 12 gauges with slugs. And the semi-automatic, it's semi-automatic. So the semi-automatic rifles in the last 10 years have really taken a big place in the driven hunt, more with the younger guys. You'll still see old guys there with their little side-by-side shoddy, because they can hunt pheasant with it as well, you know. And it basically works. There'll be a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion about where to place the guns. Let's say there'll be 30 guys who are guns. They'll be put strategically along a ridge or across a gully, hopefully in a fairly safe way. They shoot each other more often than you imagine. And then there's usually, for the average weekend hunt here in many of these, every village here has a team. Some have two. When they have two, there's usually rivalries. But each team's going to have, on the average day, the turnout will be 30 odd guys with a gun. There will usually be 2, 3, 4 guys with dogs. They'll have anywhere from 5 to 10 dogs each, hounds. And then there might be another 10 or so who are just beaters. Just in here, and it certainly is an event. It's a lot of noise, and they breed their hounds as much for their ability to hunt as for their voice. So when they're just on a trail or they've been released, they bark and yip and yap and carry on as we know hounds to do. But when they get on the very hot trail, the bark transforms into something they call a kanitsa, where they just kind of howl and wail, and then you'll hear the beaters join in, and it's just this crescendo of chaos, and it's something to behold. Yeah, there's shots going off the whole time. You can't tell what's shots at a pig, and then they'll often make blanks at home, and they just start into a 20 shell, and they'll be firing. It's very exciting to see for the first time, but I'm not a big fan of it because one of my best mates was killed, and I'd just given up on doing it because I'd had a gun. I'd had someone pointing a gun at me thinking I might be a pig, and I got out of it. And there is a significant death toll and injury toll every year from that form of hunting.
Yeah, wow. I'm
sure you can find it if you look it up, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, like Tuscany driven boar. And you'll see what I mean. It's a big social event. At halftime, they stop and roast sausages and drink wine and then repeat.
Insane. Yeah, that would be the scary aspect of it. You know, just all these 100-year-old 12 gauges, and you know the blokes are just as old as the guns.
That's exactly actually how a lot of the accidents happen. Yeah, you'll get some poor old guy his eyesight's not what it used to be. You know, the dogs also get shot quite often, even with little orange vests and all the rest of it. They get shot. Look, yeah, I think, and it's incredible. They keep doing it. It's just accepted collateral.
Nah, crazy. Bow hunting in Italy. I know that bow hunting in a lot of European countries is frowned upon, and I know that countries are slowly turning around on that. How long has bow hunting been in modern times in Italy? Has it always been allowed, or is it only recent?
Look, I don't remember if when I first did the courses, within the first few years they had regulated, meaning allowed, bows to be used. And I think that in Italy, at least before that, it just wasn't regulated. And the basic principle is if it's not against the law, you can do it. But there weren't any, they hadn't figured out how to manage it. Today, it's quite marginal, but there is, especially in this region, I would say, because the country lends itself to it. There's an abundance of game, in the alpine regions, and that there's not so much. I don't think they really do it. And some regions, but those are local administrations on a smaller scale, like what happened in SA, that are shutting it down.
Yeah.
But overall, it's kind of not. It's not significant. There isn't a huge interest. That's always hard for the people who do it. Of course, are usually pretty hardcore, pretty die-hard, because to stick with it in a place where you're not sort of well supported requires a bit of dedication. But yeah, I mean, it's legal here. It's legal in Denmark. It's not legal in Sweden. And Denmark, for example, has quite stringent and specific regulations about how and what,
Yeah, Germany, it's not legal. I think it's the last 5 or 8 years been legalized in Bulgaria, and
yeah. Finland has bow hunting. France has bow hunting. Spain, for the majority, I had a hunting concession there. It's frustrating because the administrations didn't allow us to bow hunt, but the next one across, and the national law allows bow hunting. Spain, France. I don't know about Portugal. There's not. I don't know if Portugal has it or not. I would think they do. But yeah, I mean, I think it'll grow over the next 10 years a little bit.
That's awesome. You are breaking up a little bit there. The weather's pretty average here. I'm not sure if it's here or you. But yeah, that's awesome. Normally I ask guys what their top 5 dream animals are, but I'm going to do it a little bit different today for you because you've hunted all around the world. What would be your top 5 animals for someone, like saying, because you do the guided hunts, what would be the top 5 animals you'd say for people to go out and chase if they were going out of their state, out of their country to go chase? Just say money wasn't an issue, stuff that you've hunted.
Okay, well, if money's not an issue, I would say, and it depends on your taste, but the adventure of North America, the Yukon moose on horseback or a fly-in camp is something special. Even elk, backcountry elk hunts. I mean, I enjoy the backcountry stuff. There's a lot of luxury lodges in South Africa where you have 5-star accommodation and great hunting. Even this Tuscany hunt, very comfortable. Nice accommodation, great food, wine. It's like 10 minutes from your swimming pool to the deer. So that's not that kind of hunt. But I would say the top things for someone to get out and do, you said it, interesting enough, is if money wasn't an issue, because there's a lot of hunts that are kind of underrated for being great value for money.
Okay. What would you say they are then?
If you're looking the one that always comes to my mind is Spanish ibex, because for people who haven't traveled much, or haven't traveled before, you're going to a country that's interesting, has great food, perfectly safe, easy enough to get around. It's mountain hunting. It can be really quite tough, but it's also kind of gentle, and you're likely to be in nice accommodation. And you're hunting an ibex for quite a value. There are plenty of value for money hunts there. So you get something that's kind of bigger and more impressive than a chamois. Let me put it that way. But then going back the other way for money's not an issue, then of course you'd be Africa. You know, I think elephant hunting is a special experience. I don't think shooting the elephant is that much of the anticlimax. Or if you're tracking on foot, it can still happen today that you might end up sleeping out of the bush where you end up at the end of that day tracking just to keep going. And I think the excitement of Cape Buffalo and lion, where they do it on a track in the daytime without baits, pretty hard to beat, of course. But yeah, look, I think for the experience, it's going to be backcountry, remote, wild places. It can also be Central Asia, where there are incredible mountains. You have incredible experiences with, seeing how the people live in those mountains. In some hunting camps, you can stay in the yurts that the shepherds are using, and get to see these amazing things. This is what it is to me that is important and is valuable about a lot of this international hunting, is that you find yourself living these experiences that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do as a tourist. And I mean that just because who the hell has the motivation and the imagination or the fantasy to end up in a yurt with a family of shepherds at 5,000 meters in Kyrgyzstan, and seeing the way they live their daily life and routine, which is incredible still. How they live all in these little yurts, and they pack everything away for sleeping and bring everything back for meals, and how they make bread in these ovens that they make out of mud. It's just those are the aspects that I think add the most value to a hunt, regardless of the trophy fee or the trophy size or the animal itself. It's just living these unexpected and otherwise unavailable things.
It's crazy how much the Kyrgyzstan ibex hunts have blown up for Australians. I couldn't tell you the number of Australians that have headed over there in the past. Five-ish years, actually probably a little bit longer, maybe like 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. It's crazy the amount of guys that are going over there. Same as the chasing the European fallow. It's awesome to see all these, especially seems to be mainly the Australian bow hunters that are going and breaking these grounds. I went to Ian Fenton's house in Bathurst in New South Wales in March, and he used to run the Australian Bow Hunting Museum in his back shed, and he had everything, like every achievement an Australian bow hunter has done. The first guy to shoot a yak, the first guy to shoot an ibex, the first guy to shoot a bear, all of this stuff. He had it all documented. He had the photos, he had the stories, and yeah, it was cool to go through that and see how many of the Australian hunters are breaking new ground in all these different countries around the world and taking these amazing animals.
You're exactly right. Yeah, I'm privileged enough to see some of that as well.
Nah, that's awesome.
Yeah. We've
you
talked.
know,
We've talked about a hunt. I've talked about a hunt with somebody recently that is in a pipeline. That if that comes to be, is going to be another of these groundbreaking, never done before things. But some wraps for now.
that's awesome. Well, I can't wait to see and hear about that in the future. What would be your most memorable hunt? Like, you've hunted all these different places, you've guided all these people, whether it's, a hunt where you've taken an animal or it's a hunt that you've been on guiding. What would be your most memorable hunt?
Oh, look, I always go back to something kind of humble for that. Well, no, I spent a month in Colorado doing self-guided backcountry elk, and the experience of doing the research, getting deep into every channel of research, not just maps, and there was Google Earth and paper maps, but being able to talk to game rangers, the wildlife biologists, the way that the Department of Wildlife in Colorado opens their doors to you and gives you the access to all these resources, and the satisfaction of seeing all that research pay off, and then spending the time, because I spent about 2 weeks scouting prior to the season, living in the mountains. It's you hike in. There's an area that I chose because it was the most you can't get in there on horseback because there are parts of the trail that you can't ride a horse up, so there's no access other than backpack. And spending the time in those mountains, an extended period, watching those animals and living that experience was life changing. It was just phenomenal. And the ironic part is that when the season opened, some things went wrong and I didn't get the elk. I'd found the bull I was after. I'd been photographing him. I became able to locate that elk on almost any given day. So I went home without, but I had no bitterness about it. That was my most memorable thing, backcountry, on foot, no guide, just living. And after a week or so in those mountains, it for me, it charges you more. I never run out of energy up there,
That's amazing. It's something
that's
that
kind of what I live for.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's something they say about elk over there is, you can watch them on the lead up to opening day, and then opening day rolls around and they just all disappear. It's like they know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, yeah. They in this case, during the night, I heard a lot of animals I assumed to be elk going over the rocks close to my tent. And what I didn't know in all my research was that the mountains across the valley, I don't know how far or how easily, but there was easy access to getting up very high on those mountains. And some of these animal activists had gone up there during the night before the season opened, and they were up there with air horns. They were up there rolling boulders. Yeah, they were rolling boulders off the mountain, causing rock slides that you could hear. It would have been 2 kilometers away, but I could hear the thunder and the chaos that all that created just sent the animals scattering.
That's insane.
And didn't see any more elk. At least not till the last day, but the elk I'd been watching peacefully for the entire time, they were gone. It was no longer the same scenario, just for that one day of disturbance.
That's insane. Animal activists, environmental animal activists causing all of this destruction out in the wilderness to stop someone killing an elk. That blows my mind.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, they wouldn't have known or hitting me specifically, but their intention would have been to cause as much chaos as possible to disrupt all the hunters in the region.
That's insane. That's the one thing I do like about the States is, I'm not sure if Europe's the same, but they have these hunter harassment laws. So if a hunter's being harassed while he's out hunting, the person gets punished for doing it. Where here, when you've got duck season kicking off here in Victoria and South Australia, you've got all these protesters that are actually harassing hunters, and not much gets done about it. They get taken off the wetlands, and they're back there again the next year, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah. They do have laws. I'm not really that up to date with it, but I just through hearing about it, and I think similar to they've come to be because of certain incidences, and then the times I've heard of it, they're fairly tailored to that incident. But you hear about it a little bit. However, in Tuscany and the Alpine regions, which is where I do my hunting in this country, it's celebrated. So you don't have that problem. Tuscany in particular, because you're not allowed to leave your firearm in the car. So when you go to any of these little cafes in the farmland and amongst the hills, where you'll have hunters there at 5 or 6 in the morning having their coffee, and there's people in camo. They'll have their firearm in a case, in a soft case usually, over their shoulder, walking into the cafe to have their coffee, and that's perfectly acceptable. I've never seen any sort of hostility toward hunters in Tuscany or the Alpine regions, for different reasons. I think in Tuscany it's just so widespread, and it's seen more as it's mostly for meat. And it's a big social activity. Whereas in the Alpine regions, it's those things as well, but there's an element also of the hunters are they're well respected because they have to be fit, strong, and clever to make their way through dangerous passages in the mountains. So they're also looked upon in a very positive light. But in the regions adjacent to the cities, especially in the north, around Milan and Bologna to Turin, you hear about these protests where a group of well-intentioned animal rights activists will find some hunters and go and give them a hard time.
No, that's great to hear that the majority part, well, the areas that you're in anyway, are very hunter-friendly and somewhat firearm-friendly as well. Go into a cafe with a rifle in a soft case, that's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would be I'm going to break this one down into 2 questions. What's been your favorite wild game that you've eaten all up? And what is your favorite wild game dish that's your go-to if you're cooking some wild game up?
Look, I don't know that I have a single favorite, but one thing I think I might be different to a lot of hunters, or well, not hunters, but I don't find that wild game has to have this famous gamey taste. Especially, and this doesn't always pan out as possible when you're in a hunting scenario, but doing a lot of culling as well as hunting, when you've got an animal that is headshot and bled, and then it is hung in a chiller for, here at the property, I have a chiller, and I've hung carcasses in there for up to and over 2 months. The quality of game meat is phenomenal, and especially in this region where they're eating wild boar that's come from a driven hunt, where the animal has been chased, harassed, potentially wounded once or twice before getting finally shot. While they celebrate with some vino and roast up some sausages, then it's dragged off to the local butchery and hacked to pieces, and then it's eaten the next day. Well, that's going to be pretty poor. So I enjoy virtually all game meat. There's very little out there I say is not good, if anything. But it has to just be treated well. And if it has to die as peacefully as possible with the least amount of trauma and stress. If it's been shot through the lungs, heart, liver, brain, most of the blood will come out anyway. So there's not necessarily the need to bleed it out. And then if that meat's taken good care of, possibly the best way to eat wild game is I'll marinate it overnight with some salt, pepper, bit of olive oil, maybe some rosemary, maybe or just one herb, whatever's around, or a bit of garlic. And you don't even have to do that. And then just over flames. That's it. That's simple. In this region, in this country, they have a lot of complex and delicious recipes. They have one where they do wild boar and hare, either of the two, in a rich sauce with dark chocolate. They have another traditional recipe in this part of Tuscany with hare, where the blood of the hare is collected, and it has the hare's blood, then the heart, liver, and lungs chopped up finely and fried up, and then added to basically a tomato-based sauce with the blood. And when that's prepared well, it's delicious. It's rich and it's earthy, and it's a good thing. But I'm a big fan of just roasted meat, salt and pepper.
Yeah, same. I recently not cooked up, but I made some venison tartare. Have you had that?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah.
In Tuscany, again, I've learned a lot because I keep referring to Tuscany because I did live in the region for 20-odd years. Raw meat is a big thing. So they eat their sausages raw.
Yeah, wow.
Pork sausages, that's a typical thing. And when hunters come here and they try that, it's often a bit apprehensive, but it is delicious.
American hunters would be losing their minds.
Yeah. Well, we've never had anybody get crook. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people doing it on a daily basis here, and it's fine. But also tartare of venison is fairly popular, as well as whenever you're making venison sausages or salamis, which will be seasoned for up to or over a year, you'll be scooping out bits of the mince. Once it's seasoned, it's got the salt and pepper and a bit of garlic, or there'll be little kids will come in and grab a scoop, or you will, or your old mate that's helping you out. There's a lot of snacking as you go. And then we prepare venison, fallow, whatever, the bigger, cleaner cuts of muscle. cut fairly thin with a bit of lemon juice on them, if you like that, and just salt, pepper, and yeah, we do. We eat a lot of raw meat.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do a lot of ceviche, but yeah, I recently did some tartare out of some samba inners, and it was incredible. I made it for everyone up at work. Gave them their own little plate with half of it with venison tartare and half with carpaccio, and it was insane. Like I love carpaccio, but the tartare, it blew a lot of people's minds because they're like, I'm eating a raw egg, raw venison, and they were completely like. It took me 20 minutes to get 3-4 of the guys to try it, and then not many of the other guys did. But when they all tried it, they're like, "That is so good." I was blown away.
Absolutely, it's awesome. You're right. It is. It's because of the variety of food culture in Europe. There's always something very out there for somebody to try. And honestly, I've never seen it go badly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, working with the guys that I take heart in, I've taken liver in, I've taken all sorts of cuts and bits and pieces and made everyone try it. And yeah, not many people have not liked it, which is pretty good to see. We've been going for almost an hour 40. I don't want to hold you up too much longer. I don't know what time it is over there, but it's either really early or...
No, it's the middle of the day.
Oh, middle of the day, beautiful.
Yeah, it's 10 minutes to midday here.
Oh, beautiful. Getting on to the end of the podcast anyway, we spoke about, the culture in the area that you're mainly in and what you see with hunters. But traveling around the world, how do you see the majority of the public views on hunting and hunters? Like, you're in and out of airports all the time, in and out of these African countries, European countries, and you're probably traveling with hunting gear and bits and pieces. What's the overall perception on hunters and hunting?
Well, I'm going to say that I find it to be, these days in particular, overwhelmingly positive. And I don't know if that's because of a change in my presentation and outlook, or if it's actually changed that way. But I think that when I was younger, I was probably more defensive about it, and that showed me a version of the world that was more on the offensive because of that, or it's actually changed. But it's very rare for me these days. I can't actually think of the last time that I had somebody ask me what I was doing or there for and have a negative reaction. And we have with my partner is photography, and she covers high-end, fancy, luxury, celebrity events, weddings, and even there, I used to be a little bit apprehensive about mentioning what it is that I do, and it's probably been 5 or 6 or 7 years that I don't make any effort to keep any sort of discretion about it, any privacy. I don't do anything to show it off either. And I've been nothing but amazed by the reception that I get. So even people I, already knew of that I meet, and sort of, they might ask, or it might come up, and the reception I find is great. I'm not experiencing a lot of resistance or negative judgment. Even online, I think I know it still exists, but I get very little of it. I see very little of it. Maybe I don't focus on it. I don't know.
No, that's great to hear. What would be something you would change about hunting and hunters for the better, for the public perspection of hunters and hunting?
As much as I didn't see the utility in it when I did it, I think going back to what we talked about at the beginning with the courses, where I think if hunters were more educated on the biology, the habits, the quirks, the incredible things, the interesting things about the animals that they're hunting, about the culture of the people who live with and around those animals, I think that by default would improve their ability to portray what we're doing, even not just the hunting side of it, to learn and show people, oh, I've been to this obscure country and found these people I'd never heard of, and they live in these ways I couldn't imagine, and here they are. Isn't this amazing? Isn't this interesting? Wouldn't you love to experience this? And hunting is one of the maybe the few ways that you can get that deep and that connected to those people and that world. I think that would help a lot. And maybe a little bit of competency with their weapons, something that hunters on the whole, especially the ones who are traveling internationally, they don't get the opportunities to practice and become very proficient. A lot of them don't get those opportunities because they're living a busy life, and they're going hunting as a break. And I think that would make the experience more reliably better for them. Those two things: awareness, culture, and a little bit of technical ability.
No, that's an amazing answer. That's great. And finally, the big question, I love asking everyone this because everyone answers it in such a unique way that I can relate to everyone's answer, and I'm sure all the listeners can, and they're probably sick of me saying this at every podcast, but what is hunting to you?
Oh, okay. It's a way of viewing the world and life, and it's a way of understanding life. It's, to me, I don't think it's necessarily this for everybody, because I have the privilege of having hunting as a portal to access so many different places. So it's also that for me personally, it's the channel through which I get to see and visit and experience and connect to incredible things, people, places that I wouldn't otherwise have that privilege. So it's a journey, right? It's the path of the journey through life that is so much more enriched than going on holiday somewhere.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic answer. That last little bit is there's something about going on a hunting trip compared to like a family holiday or just relaxing somewhere. Like, I don't get the same out of going for a relaxing holiday as I do, a hunting trip where, over here, like I did a red trip to New South Wales in March for the Raw. And it was a 14-hour drive straight after work. I'd been up since 3 a.m., worked all day, drove all night, rocked up to the property, running on caffeine and no sleep, and, shot a brilliant stag, lost my keys, and everything went down from there, and just a chaotic event filled trip like that, compared to where you're sitting around having a few beers, relaxing by a pool. It's just, there's nothing better.
Yeah, you come away from that fulfilled, satisfied, and happy. Yeah,
you don't
absolutely.
get that satisfied, like being satisfied from a trip where you're sitting around a pool as you do,
No.
even an unsuccessful hunt.
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, probably my greatest hunting experience was unsuccessful from the hunting point of view. I didn't get what I went for. I didn't get anything.
Yeah. That's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been an awesome chat, and I'm glad that we could do a deeper dive on some of these questions some of these things I heard you speak about on Maddie's podcast, because I was listening to it. I'm just like, oh, that's awesome. I need to learn more about that. And I just love chatting to people that are, have a different hunting style and a different hunting lifestyle. Like it's awesome. The time difference is always a bastard, chatting to some of the people in different countries, but I'm glad we could make this work reasonably well. I really appreciate you coming on. And if people want to follow you, where can they find you? And if people want to book a hunt with you and inquire about where you offer hunts, what animals you offer hunts for, where can they get in contact with you?
On Instagram, on Instagram and the website, really. I think Facebook does its own thing according to what Instagram does. I don't really follow it. I try to answer the messages on Instagram, but I've got my partner taking care of the admin side of things and the social media, like the managing of it. But definitely get in touch through Instagram or trips at Ridgewalker Expeditions, or www.ridgewalkerexpeditions.com. And I'm pretty, if you can get a hold of me on the phone, I'm always available to chat, which I find to be the best way to figure out what somebody's looking for. But Zach, thank you so much for also having me on, and it must be getting late for you, so making the time to make it work.
No, anytime. You're more than welcome on anytime. If you want to, discuss things in the future, or if you ever want to promote something that you're doing, you're more than welcome. Reach out and come on. And if you're ever down in South Australia, I'd love to have a beer with you.
Thank you. Me too, mate. Yeah, absolutely.
Nah, easy as, Joe. I'll let you go from there.
Easy.
And
cheers.
Yeah, well, this episode will be out in 2 weeks' time, and I'm sure it's going to get a great response from people. And I'll chuck all those links up that you said on the post when it comes out. So nice chatting with you, Joe, and I'll let you go. Catch you later.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Hunting Connection Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions and gained valuable insights into the world of hunting, fishing, and the outdoors. To stay connected with us and never miss out on an update, please be sure to follow us on social media, all at Hunting Connection Podcast. We appreciate your support and would love for you to share the podcast with your friends and family. Don't forget to tag us in your hunting photos on social media and let us know about your experiences. Your feedback is invaluable to us, so please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Together, we continue growing and delivering more captivating episodes for all hunting enthusiasts. Stay connected, stay informed, and keep pursuing your passion for the hunt. Until next time, happy hunting.